listening to Paranomaly, stories inspired by the unexplained, the forgotten, and the things people swear they experienced. Every episode begins with fiction. Then we explore the real reports, encounters, and mysteries that inspired it. If you've experienced something you can't explain, you can share your story at paranormallymedia.com. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a review helps Paranomaly reach more listeners. Fiction first, then the truth. I got her for my 8th birthday. She wasn't just a doll. A gift from my grandmother. I remember opening the box on the kitchen table while everyone watched. Grandma smiled when I opened it. She seemed excited. She knew she'd found something special. The doll was old. Its cloth face had faded slightly with age. The yarn hair had begun fraying. One button eye sat a little higher than the other. And I remember thinking it looked sad. Not scary, just sad. Grandma told me she'd found it at an antique shop. She said the moment she saw it, she thought of me. I thanked her, because that's what you're supposed to do, but after everyone left, I carried the doll upstairs and placed it on a shelf. I didn't really play with dolls. I figured it would stay there forever. I was wrong. I got home from school around 3 in the afternoon. My mom was still at work. My dad wouldn't be home until dinner, so it was just me. I tossed my backpack beside the stairs and headed to my room. The doll was sitting on my bed. I stopped, just stared at it. I clearly remembered putting it on the shelf, but I wasn't alarmed. I assumed Mom had moved it while cleaning, and that made sense. At dinner I asked. She looked confused. What doll? The one Grandma gave me. I haven't touched it. Dad laughed. Maybe it wanted a better view. Everyone laughed, so I laughed too. And that should have been the end of it, except the next day it happened again. This time the doll was sitting beside my bedroom door, facing inward, looking toward my bed. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if I'd moved it, and maybe I had. I forget things, and that happens. So I picked it up, placed it back on the shelf. Problem solved. That night I woke up thirsty. The hallway was dark, and the house was quiet. I walked downstairs to get water, and I looked into the living room, and the doll was sitting on the couch, watching the staircase. I froze. Even now I can't explain it. It wasn't where it should have been, that was all, but something about seeing it there in the dark felt wrong. I grabbed it, and took it upstairs, placed it back on the shelf, then jumped into bed and pulled the blankets over my head. The next morning it was sitting on my desk, facing the bed again, always facing me, not the window or the wall, me. A week later, I started finding notes, tiny scraps of paper, childlike handwriting. At first I thought they came from school, something stuck on my backpack, but they kept appearing. One on my desk, one inside a shoe, one taped to my bedroom window. The notes all said the same thing. Hi, friend. That's it. Nothing threatening or dramatic. Hi, friend. I showed my parents. Dad immediately assumed I was making them myself. Mom thought another kid at school was playing a prank. Neither explanation made much sense, but they were adults, and adults need explanations. I was beginning to run out of them. Things got worse after the sleepovers started. Not sleepovers with friends, but with the doll. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find it on my bedside table. Not on the shelf, not across the room, beside the bed, close enough to touch. The first few times I carried it back, and eventually I started throwing it. I didn't care if Grandma got upset. I didn't care if I messed it up. One night, I threw it into the closet and shut the door and blocked it with a chair. The next morning, it was sitting on my pillow, looking directly at me. I screamed, and they came running. The closet chair was still there, the door still closed, but the doll was sitting on my bed. Dad looked worried for the first time, not scared or concerned. The kind of concern adults get when they think a child is developing a problem. Maybe stress or nightmares, maybe imagination, and maybe something worse. My parents started discussing doctors and counselors, sleep studies, anything except the possibility that I was telling the truth. I stopped talking about it. That was easier. The doll continued moving, and I continued pretending not to notice. Then came the night that changed everything. The night nobody could explain. The night my parents finally saw something too. I woke sometime after midnight. No reason, just awake. Moonlight filled the room. Enough to see shapes, enough to see the doll, standing beside the bedroom door. Standing. Its cloth legs hanging unnaturally straight. Its head tilted slightly toward me. I remember staring, certain I was still dreaming. Then the doll slowly raised one arm and pointed toward the hallway. A second later, something heavy slammed into the wall outside my bedroom, hard enough to shake the entire house. My father shouted downstairs, and my mother screamed, and from somewhere beyond my room I heard footsteps running through the house, not one set, several, fast and desperate, as if someone had broken in and was running all over the place. And then, all at once, the house fell silent again. Not the kind that settles over a home after everyone goes back to bed. This was different, like something was strangling sound. I sat frozen in bed staring at the doorway, and the doll hadn't moved. It was still standing, still pointing, its button eyes fixed somewhere beyond me, toward the hall, toward whatever had just happened. I heard my father's voice downstairs, low and angry. Then another sound, the front door opening. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway, and my parents were already there. Dad stood at the bottom of the stairs holding a flashlight, and Mom was behind him, both looking toward the front door. It was wide open, the deadbolt unlocked, the chain hanging loose. Dad searched the entire house, every room, every closet, the garage, outside, nothing. No broken windows, no footprints, no signs of entry, no signs of anyone leaving. Eventually, everyone went back to bed, or at least we pretended to. I know I didn't sleep, and judging by the light under my parents' bedroom door, neither did they. The next morning, the doll was back on the shelf, exactly where it should have been, like nothing had happened. I stared at it, trying to decide if I hated it or feared it more. I think it's somehow both. After that night, my parents stopped laughing. That changed everything. Before, they thought I was imagining things. Now, they weren't sure. The problem was, they still didn't know what to believe. And Dad started checking the locks every night, twice, sometimes 3 times, and Mom stopped leaving me home alone after school. Neither one admitted why, but I noticed. Parents think children don't see things. They're wrong. We see everything. And the doll continued moving, not every day, and that somehow made it worse. Instead, it just happened often enough to keep everyone nervous. A week would pass and nothing. Then you'd walk into a room and find it somewhere impossible, waiting, always facing you. One afternoon, I came home from school and found it sitting at the dining room table, a plate in front of it and a glass beside, as if someone had prepared dinner for it. And my mother burst into tears when she saw it, not because the doll was terrifying, but because she knew she hadn't done it, and for the first time she couldn't think of anyone who had or could. And the notes returned shortly after that. Hi, friend. Miss you. Play with me. Simple, childlike, almost friendly, which was worse. One appeared inside my lunchbox, another tucked beneath my pillow. One was folded neatly inside Dad's wallet. And that one scared him, I could tell. He tried hiding it, but I saw his hands shaking. The first person outside the house to witness something was my uncle. He's the kind of man who thought every problem could be solved with enough common sense, and he stayed for dinner one night, and Dad finally told him everything. The doll, the notes, the sounds, the movement, and Uncle Ray laughed through most of it. Then he picked up the doll, held it by one arm, and called everyone crazy. You people are letting a toy scare you? Then he tossed it to the couch. And the conversation moved on. Dinner continued, and everyone relaxed a little, until Uncle Ray suddenly stopped talking, mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on something behind us. Finally, we turned around, and the doll was sitting upright, exactly where Uncle Ray had thrown it, except now its head was turned toward him, directly toward him, its arm raised, pointing at him. Nobody touched it, nobody was close enough to touch it, and everyone in the room knew that. Uncle Ray left shortly afterward, and he never came back. Years later, I asked him about that night, and he refuses to discuss it. The subject made him uncomfortable, which, if you know Uncle Ray, was nearly impossible. And things escalated again after that. The house began feeling crowded. That's the best way I can describe it. You'd walk into an empty room and immediately feel like someone else was there already, watching and waiting and just present. And the nightmares started. Not just mine, but everyone's. Dad dreamed about footsteps, Mom dreamed about a little girl standing beside the bed, and I dreamed about the doll. Every night, always the same. It would stand at the foot of my bed, motionless, then slowly begin walking closer, one step at a time, until I'd wake up, sweating, my heart racing, certain I'd seen it just move. Then came the final night, the night nobody talks about anymore. I woke around 3 a.m, and the house was completely wrong inside. Just cold and quiet, the silence that makes your ears ring. I sat up and the doll was gone and the shelf empty. For several seconds I just stared, then I heard a child crying, soft, somewhere downstairs. I ran into the hallway. My parents were already awake, and Dad stood outside their bedroom. Mom looked terrified. They heard it too. The crying continued, coming from below us. Slow and broken and pleading. We followed it downstairs together. Every light in the house suddenly flickered, then stabilized, and the crying stopped. We reached the living room, and there it was, the doll, sitting in the middle of the floor, facing us, surrounded by dozens of notes, pages and scraps, pieces torn from books and papers scattered everywhere, every single one covered in the same handwriting, the same childish letters, the same message written over and over again, not "hi friend" or "play with me," a different message, one repeated hundreds of times. Mine. My father grabbed me immediately and pulled me towards the door. I remember him shouting for my mother, and I remember everyone moving at once. Then I remember the sound, a child's voice, soft and gentle, coming from behind us. Stay. We left. The house was sold 6 months later, and my parents never told the new homeowners what happened. I never went back, and I never wanted to. But every now and then, usually late at night, I'll wake up from a dream, and for a few seconds, before my eyes adjust to the darkness, I could swear I see something sitting quietly in the corner of the room, watching and waiting. An old friend of mine. The story you just heard was inspired by one of the most famous haunted objects in the world, Annabelle. Not the porcelain doll from the movies, not the grinning figure covered in cracks and shadows that most people picture today. The real Annabelle is much simpler. A Raggedy Ann doll, cloth body, yarn hair, and button eyes. The kind of doll that might sit on a child's bed without attracting a second glance. And perhaps that's part of what makes the story so unsettling. Because if the reports are true, nothing about Annabelle looks dangerous. The events most people associate with the doll began in 1970. A young nursing student named Donna received the Raggedy Ann doll as a gift from her mother. Donna lived in an apartment with her roommate, Angie. At first, the doll appeared completely ordinary. It sat on Donna's bed, nothing unusual. But before long, the two women began noticing things that seemed difficult to explain. The doll appeared to change positions. They would leave it sitting on a bed and later find it in another room. Sometimes its arms would be positioned differently. Sometimes its legs would be crossed. At other times, it would allegedly appear in locations where neither woman remembered placing it. At first, they dismissed it. Memories are imperfect and objects get moved without us paying attention. But according to the reports, the incidents became harder to ignore. The doll wasn't simply changing positions. It seemed to be moving throughout the apartment. And one day, they reportedly returned home to find the doll sitting upright in a chair. Another time, they found it kneeling. The problem was that the Raggedy Ann doll's soft cloth legs supposedly made that position difficult to achieve without deliberately arranging it. And then came the notes. According to Donna and Angie, small handwritten messages began appearing throughout the apartment, and the messages were allegedly written on parchment paper. This raised a problem, because neither woman kept parchment paper in the apartment. Some of the messages reportedly contained simple phrases. One of the most frequently repeated accounts involves the notes reading, "Help us," or "Help Lou." Lou was a friend of the women who frequently visited the apartment, and unlike Donna and Angie, Lou was reportedly uncomfortable around the doll from the beginning. According to later interviews, Lou felt something was wrong, not because the doll looked frightening, because of the feeling he experienced whenever he was near it. He repeatedly urged the women to get rid of it, and they did not. Then came an event that would permanently change the story. Concerned about what was happening, the women reportedly contacted a medium, and the medium conducted a session and claimed to have contacted the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. And according to that story, Annabelle was said to have been a child whose body had been discovered near the property years earlier. And the medium claimed the spirit felt comfortable around Donna and Angie. It was lonely and lost and looking for companionship. And according to that account, the women felt sympathy for the child and they gave the spirit permission to remain. And that decision would later become one of the most discussed parts of the case, because the next investigators who became involved would reach a very different conclusion. The activity reportedly escalated. Lou would later describe a terrifying experience involving sleep paralysis. One night, he claimed to wake up, unable to move. According to this account, the doll appeared at the foot of his bed, and he watched it as it slowly moved upward toward him, then climbed onto his chest. He reported feeling unable to breathe, unable to cry out, and unable to move, and the experience ended suddenly. Many people today would immediately recognize similarities to sleep paralysis, but for Lou, the experience felt completely real, and it would not be the last incident. Another event reportedly occurred while Lou and Angie were alone in the apartment, and according to the story, they heard movement coming from Donna's room. Believing an intruder might be inside, Lou entered to investigate. The room appeared empty, but as he turned to leave, he reportedly felt a sudden burning pain across his chest, and later he discovered a series of deep scratches running across his torso. Accounts vary on the exact number, some say 3, some say 7, and according to Lou, the wounds healed unusually quickly. Within days, they had almost completely disappeared. At this point, the women sought additional help. That help would arrive in the form of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Few names are more closely associated with paranormal investigation than the Warrens. Over the course of their careers, they've investigated countless reports involving hauntings, possessions, apparitions, and unexplained phenomena. After examining the situation, the Warrens reportedly disagreed with the medium's assessment. According to the Warrens, the entity was not the spirit of a child. Their conclusion was much darker, and the Warrens claimed the presence was inhuman. According to their interpretation, the entity had never been a little girl. Instead, they believed something else was pretending to be one. And they argued that spirits do not possess dolls, rather, entities manipulate objects and people in order to gain trust and influence. In their view, the doll was not the source of the activity. It was a tool, a focal point, a way for this presence to interact with people around it. The Warrens reportedly arranged for the doll to be removed, and even that journey produced its own stories. According to Ed Warren, strange problems occurred during the drive home. The vehicle allegedly experienced repeated mechanical difficulties, steering problems, engine trouble, and other incidents the Warren believed were connected to the doll. Whether coincidence or something more remains a matter of personal belief. Eventually, the doll arrived at the Warrens' collection. Over time, it would become one of the most recognizable objects in paranormal history. The doll was placed inside a wooden case. Visitors who toured the museum frequently stopped to see it, and with those visitors came more stories. Many of the reports surrounding Annabelle involve people who allegedly ignored warnings. One of the most frequently repeated accounts concerns a young man visiting the museum with his girlfriend, and according to the story, the man mocked the doll, he challenged it and taunted it, and repeatedly struck the glass case. The Warrens repeatedly warned him to stop, and he refused. And later that day, while riding home on a motorcycle, the man was involved in a fatal accident, and his girlfriend survived. And stories like this helped expand Annabelle's reputation far beyond the original apartment. Over the decades, countless visitors claimed to experience strange feelings around the doll. Others described overwhelming anxiety. Some reported nightmares after seeing it. Others described a sensation of being watched. Skeptics point out that Annabelle's fame naturally influences expectations. If someone is told an object is haunted, they are more likely to interpret unusual experiences through that lens. And believers counter that the consistency of certain reports is difficult to ignore. And that is where the Annabelle story remains today, not as a question of whether a doll can walk across a room, but as a larger question. Can an object become associated with something beyond itself? Can places, people, or items retain the imprint of experiences we don't truly understand? Or are haunted objects simply mirrors, reflecting our fears back to us? More than 50 years after Donna first received a simple Raggedy Ann doll as a gift, people are still asking those questions. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of the Annabelle case. Not that a doll allegedly moves, or notes allegedly appear. Not that investigators disagreed about what was happening, but that a child's toy sitting silently behind glass continues to make people uncomfortable decades later. Because whether Annabelle is merely a doll, or something more, very few people seem interested in finding out firsthand. You've been listening to Paranomaly. If you've experienced something you can't explain, share your story at paranormallymedia.com. And remember, just because something hasn't been explained yet, doesn't mean it never happened.